FK Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles. This is Uprising, and I'm Sonali. It's Friday, June 12th, 2015. Rupert Murdoch steps down from 21st Century Fox, paving the way for his sons to take over. We'll turn to John Whitehead of Media Matters for America to examine Murdoch's legacy. And we'll have an in-depth discussion on food justice in low-income communities of color. Neelam Sharma will tell us about a Southern California effort to bring the first organic market to South Los Angeles. And Mariela Cedeño will share the challenges of running such a market in West Oakland. That's coming up after the news. Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Arun Gupta, sitting in for Christina Mislan. Arun is a journalist and a regular contributor to The Guardian in these times, The Progressive and Truth Out. Hi, Arun.
Hi, Sonali.
President Obama and the Republican Party are cementing their alliance on trade with a vote in the House today to authorize fast track for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. Despite strong opposition from the Democratic Party, Obama is eager to push through the TPP, an ultra-secret trade agreement that makes democratic decision-making on practically every arena of life subservient to corporate interests and profits. The House vote is extremely close, however, as progressive activists and organizers intensely lobbied their representatives to vote no. Meanwhile, European Union leaders are upset over the TPP too, but only because House Republicans pushed through an amendment to the bill being voted on today that bans Obama from negotiating on climate-related actions or immigration policy. Members of the European Parliament signed a letter today saying, quote, tackling climate change is essential for everybody's prosperity. Arun, how crucial is today's House vote on fast track?
Well, it's very important because it'll, if it passes, it pushes it forward through the process in terms of granting Obama this authority. And I think, what we need to understand is that Obama, as president, really only has two jobs. One is commander-in-chief of the U.S. war machine. The second is basically the chief executive of the American-led project of capitalist globalization. So we have a president who's basically done nothing for workers, went to Copenhagen early in his presidency and helped to sabotage climate change accords, then has been one of the leading warmongers in U.S. history, has done was worse than the Bush presidency in terms of immigration, but he's basically using a huge amount of political capital to push this through, which will really devastate the Democratic base. I think, we need to look at it in this historical context.
And then the Israeli government has decided to not hold itself accountable for the deaths last summer of 4 Palestinian children on a Gaza beach, just days after Israel launched its 51-day war on Gaza in full view of international journalists. The Israeli military launched airstrikes against a group of children playing near the Gaza City harbor. The 4 victims were cousins aged 9 through 11 from the same family of fishermen. The Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, released a statement last night saying that Israeli troops believed they were firing at members of Hamas on July 16, 2014. Calling the incident an error but not a crime, the statement added, quote, the tragic outcome of the incident does not affect the legality of the attack. The United Nations is currently readying its report on last summer's Israeli assault on Gaza that killed more than 2,100 Palestinians, including 500 children. Arun, I can't help but think of how police departments in the U.S. justify the killings of unarmed African Americans when I read this story about Israel's defense of killing Gaza children. It's a tragedy, but not a crime. What do you make of this decision?
Well, we can also think about it in terms of the U.S. war in Iraq, where you had the U.S. may have killed over 1 million Iraqis, but the number of U.S. soldiers who were actually prosecuted for war crimes would probably, successfully prosecuted, would probably fit into a minivan. Israel is engaged in epic scale crimes against humanity. It's basically involved in a long-term extermination project, genocide against the people who live in Gaza. It's absolutely absolutely horrendous, the conditions people are living under. The only reason this particular crime stands out is because it was witnessed by journalists, and they
Right.
could clearly see there were young boys playing on the beach.
And finally, a bizarre story of racial impersonation is making the rounds of the internet today. The parents of an NAACP leader in Washington state have revealed that their daughter is a white woman impersonating an African American. 37-year-old Rachel Dolezal, who was selected to lead the Spokane chapter of the NAACP in January, claimed to be of black, white, and Native American heritage. Her parents say she is mostly of German and Czech ancestry with some Native American links. They also released a photo of her as a straight-haired, blonde, white-skinned woman in her youth. Dolezal, whose skin now appears darker and hair is curly, refused to answer a point-blank question by a reporter as to whether she was black. She is reported to have said, quote, "The question is not as easy as it seems. There's a lot of complexities, and I don't know that everyone would understand that. We're all from the African continent." Dolezal has been active on issues of police violence and in May launched the Moral Mondays Northwest campaign for the NAACP. Interestingly, a white woman suffragist named Mary White Ovington co-founded the NAACP, but she never pretended to be black. Well, Arun, I'm not sure what to think of this story, but a lot of African Americans are expressing a lot of anger on Twitter today, and understandably so. What do you think?
I think there's a right to be upset. I don't think there's anything that would bar her from being president of the local chapter just because she is white. And if she has, honest concern about the issues and is willing to devote her time and energy, there's no reason she couldn't be head of the chapter. I think being dishonest about her racial background, though, it really is, it's frankly offensive.
Well, I want to thank you, as always, Arun, for joining us today. We'll have you on the show for the next couple of weeks. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Arun Gupta, sitting in for Christina Mislan, is a journalist and regular contributor to The Guardian in these times, The Progressive and Truth Out. This is Uprising. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. The most notorious media conglomerate owner in the world, Rupert Murdoch, is retiring from his position as chief executive of 21st Century Fox. He will be handing over the reins of his company to his son, James Murdoch, while his oldest son, Lachlan Murdoch, will be executive co-chairman. Rupert Murdoch is still expected to be actively involved in the running of the company. Profits at Fox recently have not been as high as expected, which might be a reason for the timing of the transition. Investors on Wall Street have preferred to have someone outside the Murdoch family run the day-to-day operations of the company, and the replacement of longtime Chief Operating Officer Chase Carey with a Murdoch may be making some people nervous. An 84-year-old native of Australia, Rupert Murdoch has amplified his ultra-conservative political views through his many media outlets around the world. 21st Century Fox, which includes Fox News Channel, has most significantly cultivated a strong following among U.S. conservatives and provided a political platform for the Republican Party. My guest is John Whitehouse, Digital Director at Media Matters for America. Welcome to Uprising.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Now, your organization has relentlessly followed what Fox News does and tracked their inaccuracies and sometimes outright lies and analyzed what they do. So you're quite intimate with not just Fox News Channel, but what Rupert Murdoch's influence has been. First, on this news of him retiring from 21st Century Fox, it shouldn't be surprising. He's 84 years old. Does it mean that he is really stepping down?
No, it doesn't. It means that this is more about him setting up his sons to take over for him than about him stepping down from anything. Ultimately, I think the only thing he's stopping right now is stopping taking that title that he has as CEO. Beyond that, I think this is going to be much business as usual in the short run. He's still the chairman of both News Corp and 21st Century Fox. So I wouldn't expect too much to change.
And so let's talk. This gives us an opportunity, however, to sort of examine his legacy in general, and what's been happening with Fox over the last few years. And we should also get a sense of what the footprint of 21st Century Fox is. Aside from Fox News Channel, what does Murdoch own through this company?
A lot of what he owns is, in the United States, Fox Broadcasting Company, which broadcast shows like The Simpsons and Empire and things like that. It also owns, in Europe, it owns the Sky companies, at least a large portion of them. And the other thing it owns is the 20th Century Fox movie studio. Those are the big things that it owns. There's some other, it also owns some Star, I believe, in India and elsewhere. And some other things beyond that too, but that's the bulk of what he owns.
Now, he was head of News Corporation, or he resigned from a particular position at News Corporation, I should say, in 2012. You know, these corporate executive titles are very confusing. There's chief executive officer, there's there's chief operating officer, there's co-executive, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a major controversy at News Corporation in Britain in 2012 that he was questioned over publicly, and it was the so-called phone hacking scandal. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. What happened was, and people are familiar with, they're familiar with the $1 million case. And what came out when the police in Britain looked into phone hacking, is it turns out there was widespread industrial strength phone hacking at News Corp's companies or newspapers in Britain at the time. And the one that ended up getting the most focus was News of the World, which eventually shut down. But it also happened at The Sun, which is another Murdoch newspaper in Britain. And so what happened was when they looked into these, they found out, and James Murdoch's defense in these situations, once the police looked into it, was that he had no idea what was going on in his company, even though he was sent emails detailing exactly what was going on. So basically his defense in the phone hacking scandal was that he was a very poor executive. And it was successful enough that he got off and wasn't charged with anything. But in return, he was rewarded and promoted even further and now he's taking the CEO title. That's the long and short of what's happened.
And then Rupert Murdoch resigned from the directorship at News International Group. So he, at least on the face of it, appeared to take some kind of heat for it. And he's been involved in so many controversies here in the U.S., of course. And he's globally been an avowed climate denialist. He is, of course, pro-war. He made controversial comments over President Obama. And most recently, in the wake of the Charlie Hebdo shootings, he made derogatory comments on Twitter about Muslims. Does that about sum it up, or have I missed anything?
And I think you've pretty much covered it all. But I think what's interesting about Rupert Murdoch is that occasionally he will tiptoe up to the line of good taste before backing away from it. Because so if you look a few years back, he was actually really, really involved at one point in actually taking some action on climate change just a few years ago. And what happened was when he saw how the political climate shifted, he's backed way off that position, and now he's basically one of the foremost opposers of taking any sort of action, while still being cagey about whether the science is right or wrong, which is the standard position. But I think what's interesting, at least to me, about all of this is that if you look at when he fund the organizations that he funds, whether it be Fox News on television or all of his newspapers, is that they will push the line on all of these things, even beyond what Murdoch may or may not say on social media, or you may or may not believe. And so he will let his companies just run wild without any sort of checks and balances, and then he will, if you look at one position where he's been good on, is immigration. He came from Australia. He wants to do more on immigration in the United States. And so he's the one going up and asking, why can't Obama take action on immigration? And meanwhile, he's not paying attention to all of the things that Fox News is saying on it. So I think what's interesting to me is that his business model undermines any sort of good, even gray silver linings that he may have. Is that his business model completely undermines that and backfires on that. And I think that in the long run is ultimately what the News Corp and the Murdoch ethos is all about. Is about this culture of corruption. Is that even no matter what you may or may not believe, we have to say this to make money. Let's do that instead. And if you look at his critiques from even within the family, his daughter Elizabeth gave a speech in 2012 that was a broadside against James Murdoch and Rupert Murdoch's ethos of make money first, have a community, do anything for your community, or what's good morally second. And what's interesting yesterday is that he promoted Lachlan, but he's basically pushed Elizabeth out of any sort of role in leading any of his companies whatsoever. And right now she's completely on the outside looking in.
Well, that's an issue that I didn't even realize that there was a female Murdoch around. Now, let's talk about the issue of war, because, of course, Fox News, like others in the liberal media, I don't mean to single out Fox News on the issue of war, but Fox was particularly egregious. Looking back at the Iraq War, there was such a skewed version of reality presented. And of course, we're in the middle of another Iraq War now. I want to play a clip from the documentary, I think one of the best documentaries on Fox, Outfoxed by Brave New Films, subtitled Rupert Murdoch's War on Journalism. And this excerpt of it focuses on how Fox News watchers had a completely skewed version of what was really happening on the ground during the Iraq War.
277 U.S. soldiers have now died in Iraq, which means that statistically speaking, U.S. soldiers have less of a chance of dying from all causes in Iraq than citizens have of being murdered in California, which is roughly the same geographical size.
The People survey is interesting because you're looking at questions of basic true-false kind of factual nature. Did we find weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? These are very simple questions with very simple answers. And what the survey found was that the more likely you were to watch Fox News Channel, the more likely you were to have completely incorrect assumptions about these things.
All the research shows a very high correlation in the case of Fox News with people watching it with having a very confused notion of the world on one hand, especially of foreign policy in the Middle East, and also being strongly supportive of the government in power.
And that's an excerpt from the documentary Outfoxed: Rupert Murdoch's War on Journalism. My guest is John Whitehouse, Digital Director at Media Matters for America. John, would it be fair to say that Rupert Murdoch, through Fox News, has really created a different sort of plane of existence in the United States for conservatives who have different opinions, vastly different opinions from the mainstream, simply because Fox presents just a particular viewpoint to them, counter to their claim of being fair and balanced?
Oh, absolutely. I think what Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes, who's the head of Fox News, have done is simply unparalleled in modern media history. It's something that they look at very much to the basics of what works in terms of alternate reality, and they take it to the extreme. And I think The Outfox was the first documentary that really hit that home, and we've documented ever since then for 10 years now about what Fox News has done. And just to take a case of the Iraq War, they don't simply say we should go into Iraq. Maybe the rate of soldiers aren't dying. They don't simply do that. What they've also done, just to take one specific thing, is take the reporter whose bad reporting at the New York Times enabled a lot of other Iraq War misinformation, Judith Miller, and put her on the air for 10 years after she left the New York Times, and give her positions to criticize Middle East policies and the media coverage of war ever since then. And she's still doing that to this day. She is their person who criticizes how the media talks about Iraq to this day. So they create a clearinghouse in terms of war for these sort of for aggressive, I don't want to say aggressive, but misinformation campaigns that aren't just focused on today or tomorrow, but are focused on how to create that misinformation campaign over a 10 to 15 year period. And I think with all the news coming yesterday, the one thing that was possibly the most interesting news is that Roger Ailes isn't going to report to James Murdoch. He's not going to report to Lachlan Murdoch. He's still going to report directly to Rupert Murdoch until his contract runs out in 2 years. And so that's really, really interesting. And it's I can't think of a single parallel to that.
Right. And then apparently there is some tension between Roger Ailes and the younger James Murdoch over James Murdoch's involvement in the phone hacking scandal in Britain. So let's talk about what the future for 21st Century Fox, particularly Fox News Channel, might be under the leadership. I shouldn't even say leadership, the transitional leadership of James and Lachlan Murdoch. Who are these two younger Murdochs ideologically? How aligned are they with their father? Could their eventual takeover, because of course he won't live forever, will their eventual takeover mean a different direction for Fox?
I would say eventually. I think that's inevitable. No matter what they were doing, I think that if we're talking if Rupert's not going to be around in 10 years, then sure, it's going to shift and change, and Roger Ailes probably won't be around in 10 years. And so that'll shift and change as well. And I think that's what's really interesting is Lachlan in particular, he left Fox and Murdoch and News Corp a few years back because he was feuding so much with Roger Ailes. And so they really don't get along. And I think at some point, Rupert's going to force Fox News under that umbrella of Lachlan and James, and at which point I think there's some change is inevitable. All that being said, Fox News still makes a lot of money for 21st Century Fox. And so I think if we raise expectations for change too much, we're going to be disappointed. But I think that they are going to try to change at least a little bit. So I'm interested to see how that plays out in the next, especially after the 2016 election, I think is when we'll first start to get a really good feeling for it. But it's interesting to see how it's going to play out because I don't think we know for certain because Lachlan's been feuding with Roger Ailes and that's established. James is sort of in this middle ground where he can go either way. He seems to be more interested in sports and things like that than necessary for politics. And on the other hand, he's also donated a lot of money to the Clinton Foundation. So
right, I was reading that millions of dollars, between $1 and $5 million donated by James Murdoch to the Clinton Foundation.
Right.
Which is strange.
Yeah, it is strange. And remember, I think that happened at a time when even Rupert was participating with the organization because right now it's with Hillary Clinton running for president, it's seen as very political and oh my God, I can't believe it. Everyone's calling it a scandal, but it's a charity. It's a charity that, we can discuss how effective the charity is. That's a separate question. But at the time when people were donating, it's a charity run by a former president to do some good around the world. And it wasn't seen as very controversial. So I think if we try to read too much politically into it, we're overstating it. And I think if we try to think it as too much of a big event, then we're playing into the misinformation about the Clinton Foundation more than anything about James Murdoch.
However, James Murdoch did also donate the maximum amount allowed in federal contributions to Hillary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign. That's different from making a contribution to a charitable foundation.
Yes, that's much more along the lines of him being probably different than his father. I'm not sure how much. Because if you look at the organizations that he ran in Britain, especially, he may be more of a British-style conservative, given in News of the World, The Sun, and the British newspapers that Murdoch owns. That said, it's still unclear as to how he fits into American politics. He just hasn't been involved in it very much beyond some of these donations, and it hasn't all gone to Democrats either.
Now, what about the 21st Century Fox's showing on Wall Street? How well has the company been doing? Is there any thing beyond a coincidence between this transition that Murdoch is making and the financial stability of the company, which some are saying that that Fox has not actually been doing as well as it should have been?
It's interesting. I think it's doing, because the first thing when we talk about 21st Century Fox and News Corp on Wall Street is that the first class of stock that's owned, that controls the company, is owned the majority is owned by Murdoch himself, the Murdoch family, and Prince bin Talal of Saudi Arabia. And it's those two control a majority amount of the stock. So they can, as long as they're happy, there's not really any worry about investors, running roughshod over them. If they can control majority, everything else will be fine. That said, the investor class had a very positive relationship with Chase Carey, who's been forced out into a consulting position with these moves. And to be perfectly blunt, Chase Carey he hasn't really been involved in the political side at all. He's done a great job running the business end of Fox for years, and he's gotten nowhere with the Murdochs because his last name isn't Murdoch. He's still kept out of that circle. And if you look at the people that are kept in that circle, it's the Murdochs and the people that are close to them that run in political circles. Robert Thompson is Rupert Murdoch's best friend, and he's the CEO of News Corp. Jesse Angelo is James Murdoch's childhood friend, and he's the publisher of the New York Post. Rebecca Brooks was involved in the phone hacking scandal, and News Corp reportedly is bringing her back into a position. So, and we all know about Roger Ailes' close relationship with the Murdochs. So I think if you look at it, it's all about this culture of corruption at the top, and they have enough say, and they have enough pull to withstand these sort of outside things, even though the company, it does hurt the company. And if you talk to investors time and time again, they will talk about the Murdoch tax, is that the company could be doing a little bit better. The company could, maybe 10% or so, but because of the way Rupert Murdoch runs it, you have to take a little bit off the top. And I think you've seen that time and time again. And when that comes into play into, the content his organization produces in the Fox News channel, in these newspapers, that's when you see it hurting society, is that this culture of corruption seeps down and is published. But you see that across there's no real political angle to the movie studio, for instance. But I would certainly say that it's not run as well as it would have been if without the Murdochs in control. And so, and the same thing with the Fox broadcasting and everything else. And this Murdoch tax, time and time again, hurts the company. And we see that, we talk about it more often in Fox News Channel, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, the British newspapers, but it happens across the board.
Right. Now, John, of course, what matters to ordinary Americans is the fact that this is an organization that says it's a news organization, it's a journalism outlet, and time again we see, one-sidedness on one end of the spectrum and outright distortions and lies on the other end of the spectrum, and also a lot of hate-filled rhetoric. But there's this issue floating around on the internet that a number of years ago, Fox News won the right to lie in court, to actually lie, on its newscasts in court. And some have said that's really a myth. That's not really true. What actually happened, and what did Fox News? What sort of legal battle did it win, and does it actually mean that they can legally lie as journalists?
Well, I think the First Amendment in America is pretty clear that all the distortions that Fox News, lies, et cetera, that Fox News publishes and produces and displays on a daily basis, they're legally allowed to do that. All these news companies are in America based on our legal rights. So I don't think that's a very persuasive angle. I think it's something that there's no legal way to say we don't want to shut Fox News. That's not the way to fight back against Fox News lies. The way to fight back is to expose them for what they are and to make sure people know that they lie, and that way let the market decide, and as opposed to prevent them from broadcasting. There's just legally, I'd say that even that was settled, I would say, before Fox News even was a thing, even was supposed to be.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, John, and actually give out a website for your organization, Media Matters for America, so you guys can watch Fox News so we don't have to.
Yep, that's what we do. Our website is MediaMatters.org, and you can find us also on Facebook at facebook.com/MediaMatters.
That's MediaMatters.org, and we'll post that link to our website, uprisingwithsonali.com, later today. Thanks so much, John.
Thanks, it was very much a pleasure.
My guest, John Whitehouse, is the digital director at Media Matters for America. This is Uprising. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kohatkar. The U.S. Department of Agriculture defines food deserts in this way, quote, urban neighborhoods and rural towns without ready access to fresh, healthy, and affordable food. Instead of supermarkets and grocery stores, these communities may have no food access or are served only by fast food restaurants and convenience stores that offer few healthy, affordable food options. The lack of access contributes to a poor diet and can lead to higher levels of obesity and other diet-related diseases, such as diabetes and heart disease, end of quote. Well, lack of access to fresh, healthy food ties together multiple social issues: public health, economic justice, children's rights, safety, and even self-determination. South Los Angeles has historically been one of the most impoverished urban areas in the nation. Today, despite a rich cultural diversity, it remains somewhat of a food desert. Now, activists want to change that. The group Community Services Unlimited has started a crowdfunding campaign to bring the first organic produce and grocery market to South LA. It's a complicated and expensive effort, but in Oakland, Northern California, one group of people has already realized its vision for an oasis in a food desert. In 2009, Mandela Foods Cooperative became the only full-service grocery store to serve West Oakland's 25,000 residents. Run by Mandela Marketplace, the store calls itself a worker-owned full-service retail grocery store and nutrition education center that fosters economic empowerment and community health. Joining me in studio today is Neelam Sharma, Executive Director of Community Services Unlimited, and from the Bay Area, Mariela Cedeño, Director of Social Enterprise and Microfinance at Mandela Marketplace. Welcome to Uprising, Neelam.
Thank you.
And also welcome, Mariela.
Thank you.
Well, let me start, Neelam, with you. First, can you tell us how serious the need in South LA is for a grocery store that delivers healthy and affordable food to its residents?
It's extremely serious. I mean, there has been so much work done in the last 10 or so years to connect diet-related illness, to what is available in someone's community. And in South LA, there is a proliferation of, like you said, fast food restaurants, what we define as junk food, essentially high calorie, low nutrition. There's a lot of convenience stores. There is really, since 1992, I mean, I moved to LA soon after that period in about 96 and heard a lot of conversation after the rebellion about all the promises that were made to bring in grocery stores. And in fact, there has been a net decrease of grocery stores in South LA. So the need is just as crucial as it has been for a very long time.
And Mariela, was your effort with Mandela Foods Cooperative in the same place several years ago that Neelam's effort is now? And how challenging was it to raise the funds for this? Because, it's not a small thing to try to start a grocery store.
Absolutely. I mean, definitely, I think we have the same roots that Neelam just mentioned, this idea of correlation of disinvested communities that were purposely redlined, and also really poor health indicators. And obviously part of that is influenced by the access to food generally, but also the over access of healthy food, the under access of healthy food and the over access of fast food and other sorts of things. We came about from a very resident-led effort. There have been several food assessments done in West Oakland around food map gapping and health indicators, and folks in the community were sort of sick of hearing the same thing, which was their experience of every day. They knew that there wasn't access to healthy food, and so they organized around that, and they came up with an entire food system to sort of solve the problems that they were facing in their own community, and the pillar of it was really a community-owned grocery store. When it comes to access to financing, it was definitely difficult, and I think that's sort of why Mandela Marketplace, the nonprofit, incorporated. And actually, Mandela Foods, the for-profit cooperative business, incorporated before we did, and we incorporated as a response to the issues we're facing in accessing capital. These were folks from a low-income community of color that didn't have access to the same resources that traditionally cooperatives in more affluent neighborhoods do. So we incorporated a nonprofit to figure out, can we find a way to channel funding to this effort, both through grants that were specifically targeting communities that had either were disinvested in from the economic perspective or from the health gap perspective and diet-related disease. So about 2/3 of those funds came through grants that Mandela Marketplace acquired in conjunction with the cooperative worker owners. and a third of that came through more traditional debt capital.
And now, Neelam, your effort here in Southern California for the grocery store, organic grocery store, is through a crowdfunding website. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. I will say before getting to that, it isn't just that we've just out of the blue decided to start this effort. We've been working in South LA for nearly 2 decades now, and building a market for what we do, and really proving what we've always known, that there is in fact a market in South LA for really high quality healthy food. And so we've been doing that in a number of ways, pop-up weekly stands in various locations in South LA. We've been direct selling to corner stores, who we then do social marketing with of the food. We've also been doing wholesale to various entities, including chefs and other nonprofits. So there's been a very long-term committed effort to build and to get to this point. And so we're now at this point, and we are in fact in this crowdfunding effort to raise the money to actually close escrow on this building that we're purchasing, the Paul Robeson Center, a historic building in and of itself in South LA. So we're really happy about that. And we are also, just like Mariela said, it's going to be sourced the money for this effort from a number of different places. So there's the crowdfunding. There is also going to be grants for the development of the building, because closing escrow is really just the first stage, and we're already working on the funds that we need for the build out. We're hoping to get support from a number of other entities that we're currently working with.
And this, when I think about the heroic effort that Neelam, you and Mariela and all of your colleagues are taking on to do this thing, I think of the fact that I started this story with a definition by the U.S. Department of Agriculture that not only knows that there are food deserts, but is defining them in mostly the right way. And instead of the government taking action, these very large and complicated efforts are being taken on by members of the community themselves. Mariela, and I'm wondering if you can comment on that, because more and more we rely on grants and private donations for people to help themselves when we already pay taxes to make simple things like accessible and fresh food available to us. And if you lived in Venezuela or Cuba, you could be poor, but you wouldn't worry about where to get fresh food.
Sure. I mean, I think that there's an additional level, and I'm sure that Neelam can speak to this in South LA as well, but it's not just a lack of access to government policy around it, but it's actual historical purposeful disinvestment in communities. Right. And so, the angle that we're taking is because communities then at some point have to figure out, well, how do we solve our own problems? Because there isn't anybody sort of from the government venue coming to our rescue. Having said that, USDA specifically has been a partner for us since we sort of launched this effort back in the day around this idea of creating food systems and connecting urban low-income communities to rural communities that are sister communities in the same sort of aspect of being underserved and under-resourced. But as you said, yes, I mean, ideally this would come from larger scale government policy, or even local city, county policies. And I think eventually people do come around and jump on board, but the effort really is the community building this, because that's just how it gets done. And from a practical perspective, and I think Neelam can speak to this too when she was talking about the pop-ups and the various sort of long road that it takes from marketing, there is a bottom line perspective, especially when you're looking at grocery in low-income communities where, I think a typical grocer would think it's not a good investment, that you are also building social capital, you're building a customer base, and you're building folks who are actually invested in the effort around economic development and food access. So that I think is sort of the nice part of it. But as you mentioned, yes, in an ideal world, these problems would be solved by the folks who are highlighting them in a high level.
Yeah, and whose responsibility it is to make this happen. Because when we're talking about issues of public health, that is a government responsibility. So, Neelam, it is a challenging thing to make organic, real, fresh food available affordably to anybody, not just poor folks. We know that cheap and unhealthy food is subsidized by the government, but organic food is not. I live in Pasadena, where we have the Arroyo Food Co-op, which has had a similar mission and have successfully opened a storefront. But, grass-fed beef, for example, still costs $16 a pound. Organic eggs cost, $1 an egg. Whereas if you go to the grocery store and buy conventionally grown eggs, you could get probably 5 eggs or 6 eggs for $1. So how do you make organic, healthy, fresh food accessible and affordable to poor people?
Absolutely, and you've really hit on what are our major themes. It's not just high quality, but it's affordability, right? And so how we do that is by really making this a very grassroots effort. We work with farmers who we've known for 15 more years. We purchase directly from them. We grow in the neighborhood at urban farms that we've created. We do everything that we possibly can to cut out any kind of middle person, right, that adds cost to the product before it gets to the consumer.
Whole Foods has the power of leverage. They can buy giant, they can leverage their size to get smaller prices. And then, of course, they still hike up their prices.
But our strength is that we are, so they have their strengths, which are that, and our strengths are that we are really based in our community and that we really have direct relationships. So that's one thing. The other thing that we do is that we cut out any unnecessary cost. So, we call our food beyond organic, right? Because one, we don't, we aren't restricted to the government's guidelines around what is organic. Our food is actually produced in ways that goes beyond that.
Because certification is expensive.
Because certification is extremely expensive, and our argument is that, food didn't just become organic when the government said so, right? People have been growing this way for eons, actually. And in fact, it was the way that once upon a time all food was grown. And so we cut out any unnecessary cost in that regard, but also in how we package food, how we distribute food. We deliver grocery bags by bike. So it's beyond organic, not just in how we produce the food, but in how we do everything we do, like in terms of the carbon footprint. And one more thing I'll say is, that we really draw upon the history of our founders. CSU was created by the Southern California chapter of the Black Panther Party, and I want to give much props to those whose shoulders we stand on. You mentioned earlier about, the money we rely on to do these kinds of efforts. And once upon a time, folks who were in impoverished communities, people of color, did not have a nonprofit, place to go to get money to do stuff. They just had to make things happen. And so as much as we welcome working with, foundations and whoever will support our efforts, we are really proud of the fact that we have earned our first $60,000 almost for this campaign through individuals, donating $5, $10, $50, $500. That means a great deal to us, that it really is a grassroots community effort.
And I want to turn to Mariela on the same issue of affordability. Neelam was describing that they're literally working directly with farmers, but also to an extent growing their own food locally, which is fantastic. Does Mandela Marketplace do the same sort of thing? What are the challenges you face in making fresh, healthy, organic food affordable? And what do you make of the ongoing costs? What are the ongoing costs of running your organization as well? Because I saw on your website, even though you're fully established, you still have a very large donate here button. So I can imagine there's still financial challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we share, from a Valley's perspective, what Neelam said is sort of spot on. We have really long-term relationships with farmers that we see as a sister community, and actually those relationships really came out of this community engagement effort and their own plan. It was, let's find a way to launch a community-owned grocery store. Let's find a way to increase access to healthy food in all retail points people already are, but also let's find a way to connect our community to rural communities that share some of the same issues around disinvestment. So we have long-term relationships with farmers. We source directly, and in fact, we are currently launching another business that's come out of this connection, which is a local distribution company that will also be community-owned. So we've really been able to leverage those opportunities and those partnerships in order to make sure that the food that we're getting is both sustainably grown, and again, that means a lot more beyond the typical organic labeling, but that also, one of the, I wouldn't say it's a challenge, but it's definitely a delicate balance, is that because we are partnering with farmers who are small and under-resourced, we go sort of the extra effort of making sure that the pricing that we're buying it from them is also fair to them and also supports their own income and their own families. So our relationship in price negotiation is also a little different. So, we're looking to make it affordable for the end customer, but also making sure the prices to farmers are getting are fair. And then, when it comes to general grocery stuff, more and more the worker owners of the co-op have really invested in the effort of locally sourced goods. So very often they tend to be, because they're community owned and people know about them in West Oakland and in Oakland generally, a lot of local vendors who are sort of launching some sort of line tend to come to our store first, and we're sort of invoice number one. And we get to test it out, give them some shelf space, and tell them how it's being received by customers. So it's building this ecosystem of economy outside of the health building that goes to the farmer, that goes to local vendors, and it's creating other economic opportunity in between.
Now, and my guest, just a reminder, Mariela Cedeño is the Director of Social Enterprise and Microfinance at Mandela Marketplace, which is based in West Oakland. And in studio with me, Neelam Sharma, Executive Director of Community Services Unlimited, that has an effort in South Los Angeles to open something like Mandela Marketplace, or their version of that. This issue of workers and the fact that Mandela Marketplace is a worker-owned cooperative is interesting as well. So, Neelam, I want to ask you how the links that I made earlier about what what food justice really means. Does it also include economic empowerment? Can such an effort create jobs within South LA?
Absolutely, it can, and it has. I mean, we have already, we have 12 staff. 5 of those jobs have been created directly through the social enterprise that we have, the Village Marketplace, and we plan to take on another 12 staff over the next 4 years directly for that business effort. So, but not just in the way of creating jobs. I would say it also builds, economic empowerment in our community, because essentially we're keeping dollars in our neighborhood. Right. If we're growing food locally, one of the things that we actually are working on currently is launching our second social enterprise, where we've been working for a very long time, offering free gardening and nutrition classes, really getting in depth. Not just working with people on how you create a raised bed, but giving them the resources and the tools to go home and build their own raised bed, right, after they've learned to do it with us, and all sorts of other stuff. And so we've been building a network of family homes that grow food in South LA. And so our next effort will be to, in fact, have, there are folks who want to have those home gardens who don't have the time. But, so we will be some of the youth who go through we have about 50 youth a year who go through our programs and learn how to do this work. So our next social enterprise will be those young people being paid to go build these farms, and then us being able to purchase some of that product back from these families who live in our neighborhood. So there's a huge number of ways in which this kind of, community-led, and Mariela really hit it on the head. For us, it isn't just about having a retail outlet, a store that offers good food. It's about way more than that. It's about an opportunity to interact with community members about what health means beyond what you put in your mouth. Offering, so we'll be calling this building the Paul Robeson Community Wellness Center, and the market will be just one aspect of how we build community wellness. So I think that, building community health is also about building community wealth. It's not only about that, but it is absolutely about that, and it is about empowering people. And our hope is we plan to source as much as we can locally from our community, not just the produce, but also working with small, efforts. Like there's a young woman in our neighborhood who makes her own sodas, naturally made. They're more like kombucha than even like a soda, makes her own dried fruit and dried nut kind of snacks, right? So instead of buying from big wholesalers, right? Like we'll be buying from folks and really trying to encourage those kinds of efforts in our community.
And, one of the things that's a bigger context for this whole discussion that also plays into it is an environmental issue. I mean, when you're talking about growing food locally, California is in a drought right now, and we're being told to not water gardens, and certainly that makes sense for lawns. But 2/3 of the nation's produce is grown in the California desert for consumption in the rest of the country.
Right.
And and this is part of the idea behind, of course, locally grown food. If more and more folks around the country, more and more communities grew their own food, there's less strain on California's scarce water resources as well. I mean, it's not perfect because not every state can do it, and it depends on weather and conditions, but more states can do it than do now. And Mariela, on this issue of the links with, that food justice has with a broader set of issues, how important should progressives worry about war, they worry about environment, they worry about so many issues, but how important should this issue of food justice in low-income communities be considered as a social issue worth supporting, even just ideologically and theoretically, even if they don't live in these communities?
Yeah, I mean, nothing works in isolation, right? And a lot of sort of other social stressors are caused by communities that are in situations like being disinvested in, like not having access to healthy food. And so it really becomes not an isolated neighborhood, but it becomes a larger issue, from health, how it affects education, how it affects economy down the road, how that affects your entire city, your county, your state. I mean, all these things are linked. And, and to piggyback off of Neelam's.
Mariela, we just lost your connection. We're going to bring you on right back. Mariela Cedeño is the director of social enterprise and microfinance at Mandela Marketplace. And while we're getting Mariela back, Neelam, can you give our audience links to where your crowdfunding campaign can be found online so that they can join in the effort?
Absolutely. We have a Indiegogo campaign right now, but the easiest way to access it is go to our website, which is csuinc.org.
That's csuinc.org. CSU stands for the Community Services Unlimited Inc.org. And there's only a few days left before this campaign.
Actually,
closes,
we are extending the campaign. We decided that we may as well because it's doing well, and we're going to need to raise a lot of money for the build out. So we are extending the campaign. So you have time, but please donate as soon as you can.
And in the interest of full disclosure, a friend of mine told me about this effort, which is what led me to bring you on the show today, Neelam, and I did donate, so I'm quite proud of that.
We love that.
And I'm certainly excited to see how it will pan out. And in the last few minutes of this conversation, what sort of community support is there? I mean, you talked about how there are big links with the community and residents, but I mean, when there's single moms who are struggling to make ends meet, might be juggling 2 jobs, and they just have time to rush to McDonald's on the way home and grab Happy Meals for their kids. How do you make this effort relevant to them, and how do you reach them?
Absolutely. I mean, it's how we've been doing it, which is, for example, our pop-up stands. We very intentionally locate them in places where a lot of community goes. So, for example, just one example, one of our stands is at the Expo Center, which is, there are so many programs that operate there. There are teen programs, there's a preschool, there's, and there are families who come through that space.
Right, so you go to them instead of waiting for them to come to you.
Exactly, and that's what we've been doing. And then in addition to that, we'll now have this permanent bricks and mortar space where people can come. But I did want to just, you asked earlier about, why other folks who are not in South LA should support this effort. And, and I just want to, one of my heroes, refer to his words, like a hungry man is an angry man, and the reality is that even though we have a huge availability of this food that has, very low nutrition, but high calories, people are still essentially hungry. And, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote many years ago about the specific hungers, right, of communities. He was talking then specifically about the African American community coming out of slavery and the specific hungers that existed in that community because of the way that folks had been fed, like food that was really, again, high calorie but low nutrition. And it's the same thing that is going on. So we need, so that's the reason that folks outside our neighborhood need to support this, because we need to build an engaged citizenry that is not hungry, that is nourished and can actually engage in building community and engage in social activism in a way that doesn't come from a place of hunger.
And we have Mariela back on with us for the last few minutes. Mariela, do finish your thoughts and also tell our audience in the Bay Area and those who might be visiting there soon how they can find Mandela Marketplace and also support its efforts.
Yeah, so just to sort of clarify, Mandela Foods Cooperative is the grocery store.
Right.
Mandela Marketplace is the nonprofit. And to sort of speak to what Neelam was saying, there is there is just a larger effort, and there's the grocery store, the brick and mortar idea is important because you need something that anchors folks, that people know is always there, that's always going to be there, and that's a community resource. We talk about Mandela Foods being not just a full-scale grocery store, but also a nutrition education center in a community space. And you know, that's anything from more of the ideological, holistic idea of community, but also that people can just come in and hang out in a safe space that's culturally relevant, that uplifts the neighborhood, and that looks like what it used to look like back in the 60s when West Oakland was a Harlem of the West, right? And then the marketplace, the nonprofit, supports larger efforts around access to food, around pop-up produce stands, which we do at senior centers, we do at health centers, we do at schools. We have the distribution company, which is our newest social enterprise. We work with local neighborhood liquor stores to incentivize them to offer produce and then to slowly transition into offering healthier food options. And now we've roped in finance into it. So we're working with farmers to make sure that they have money at the time that they need it, working with local vendors so they have some startup capital to bring in. Right. And so there is this a beautiful value chain that's created and this beautiful sense of community that isn't specific to West Oakland. West Oakland's where we physically are, but there's a huge ecosystem. You know, I mean, we've actually bought herbs. We've bought herbs from CSU before. Right, we have these sweet CSU or limited herbs that we sell at the store.
Well, I want to thank the two of you so much for joining us today, and really wish you best of luck in all your efforts. My guest, Neelam Sharma, in studio with me, Executive Director of Community Services Unlimited, and Mariela Cedeño, Director of Social Enterprise and Microfinance at Mandela Marketplace. You can find them online at mandelamarketplace.org. You can find the effort to fund the organic grocery store in South LA online at csuinc.org. This is Uprising. Anna Buss is our assistant producer. She's also our technical director today, along with Dan Swerdlove. Christian Beck is our production coordinator. Federico Garcia is our audio engineer. Annie Mendoza is our social media coordinator. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/uprising with Sonali. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com. Our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of Uprising. Have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you Monday.